I'm Scott Vatcher, the host of Questioning Authority, where I question authority figures about health, wealth, and relationships. This episode is brought to you by theauthorityco.com, helping health professionals be seen as the go-to authority in their community. I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Questioning Authority podcast. I'm your host, Scott Vatcher, and I'm here to question leading authority figures in health, business, and relationships to help you, the listener, achieve more authority, success, and fulfillment in both your business and in your life. I've got a super special guest with me today, Dr. Rob Sinnott. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so super excited to have you on here. I put a post out a few months ago about who's the author of a book. And when you piped in and said, I'm the author of 2 textbooks, it really went, wow, this is going to be an awesome conversation because, as we were saying in the pre-show, if you really want to learn something, you teach. But if you really, really want to learn something, write a book about it. So I'm super excited to dive into a lot of different aspects. But what I want you to do, first of all, is explain to the listener what it is that we're going to talk about for the next 30, 40, 50 minutes. So if somebody's piped in now and said, oh, am I going to give the next, numerous minutes of my life to this podcast to try and learn something? What am I going to learn?
Sure. No, I get that because time is valuable today. And quite honestly, my way of looking at things is what drives me and makes me avoid a lot of those burnout things and things that a lot of people feel in life is doing something that I'm passionate about and that to me is meaningful and something that I feel is contributing back a value to society. I remember reading a quote years ago that said, man, I don't remember who it is. I apologize for leaving the author off, but it said, man ought to be afraid to die until he's contributed something great to humanity. And I know that's like a big, lofty thing to a probably 18-year-old kid when I read that. But I thought about that and I thought, that's really true. What's left of us at the end? I mean, how many times have we walked through a cemetery and we see a gravestone from, the 1800s or something, and we think, I wonder what that person was like. We don't know anything about them, and probably no one alive knows anything about them now. And I think that if we really want to make our mark on society, we just have to put an effort out. And the compass of our philosophy, which is a philosophy of health, it fine-tunes my direction for me. And just seeing what happens in practice over these 35 years makes it not really work for me. I mean, I always tell people I retired 30 years ago. I mean, I just to go to work and I just go in every day and enjoy myself. And it's a joy. And I think finding a way to be happy at what you do. Too often I see, especially young people. I had a young man come in my office a few years ago, and he said he wanted to go to medical school. And I said, well, what specialty? And he said, well, anesthesiology. And I thought, well, that's interesting for a high school student to just pop that out. And I said, why anesthesiology? And he said, they make the most money. I said, well, they pay the most malpractice. Here in the United States, it's about $300,000 a year for malpractice for an anesthesiologist. And he was a bit shocked by that. And I said, I am a riskier driver than I am a chiropractor because I believe my car insurance is right on par with about what my malpractice insurance is. So, when you identify something you want to do and make it a monetary thing, it never becomes more than that. And it's kind of unfortunate. I think we need to see the bigger picture of something we really want to do. The old saying, find something you're passionate about and figure out how to make a living doing it. And I think that would do well for most people.
And I think from my understanding of you so far, and we'll dive deeper into it in this conversation, is that you have really found that. You've found that passion and how to make a living from it, and I think you really hit the nail on the head with this idea of legacy, because I just listened to a podcast yesterday by this guy, Alex Hormozy. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's sort of a business guru in today's world. And he's got a mission of creating $1 billion company. And it wasn't about the money for him, but the idea behind legacy was really important for him. And it was interesting because I believe it was great grandfather, was like the like king of Egypt or something, not quite
Wow.
that, but like some super high prince or king of his country, Perusia. He was
Persia?
Perusian, Persia, some
Persia.
super
Mhm.
high prince or something. And he said this guy had 400 children. Um, and yeah, I know. And in that process, obviously, numerous wives and things like that, and that's the way their culture worked. But the idea behind it is he was that rich that he could do that because he could support that, and he was this high up dude. He's like, it's only like 3 generations ago, and I don't even know who he is, and he was my great great grandfather. And
Yeah.
so the idea of legacy is they probably won't know who you are, but if you can lay a big enough legacy, they you would have had an impact on them. And I believe that that's what you're doing with your work, with writing textbooks and finding your passion and continuing to practice for so long. So thank you from the profession,
Well,
from
that's that's kind of you to say, but I had great mentors. One of my last really close friends from the previous generation, that he passed away a year. It would be actually 2 years ago this month, and he retired the December before. His wife pushed him to retire, and he was still doing mornings and evening shifts in his office. And he finally retired, and he died 4 months later. And I know a lot of people would say, well, you lose the thing that drives you. I can't really fully credit that for his passing, though, because he practiced 72 and a half years as a chiropractor.
wow,
I want to
wow.
live to 72 and a half years at this point in my life. And it just amazes me that I'm not quite halfway through that practice that this man put together. It's amazing to me. But he didn't want to quit because he saw the changes that happen under care, and the difference he made in people's lives. And how do you walk away and say, well, I'm sorry, everyone else figured out on your own? It's a difficult thing.
Hmm.
So it's something I truly enjoy doing, and it's understandable if you practice in a model that just allows you to uh, make a difference for other people.
Yeah, I guess that saying, what came to my mind was standing on the shoulders of giants. And if,
Very true.
we can be some kind of a quote unquote giant for the people that are coming up behind us, then I think that's a pretty good place to be. And so let's dive into what you do, like your passion in life. And really, my understanding is it's all about philosophy. So in chiropractic, we talk about the triad: the science, the art, the philosophy.
Hmm.
Um, what does philosophy mean to you? And so we'll talk about it within the chiropractic context, but a lot of our listeners
Sure.
aren't chiropractors. So let's talk about it in the broader sense as well. But with
Yeah.
that
To me,
question,
it's always in the broader sense, in that meaning. Anyway, I mean, to me, my philosophy, I shouldn't say my philosophy, our chiropractic philosophy in that sense is really, it helps tune that compass to magnetic north. So you know where true north is. You know where, um, you know how to make it. Helps you make the decisions you make in practice. It helps you answer questions when the patients you see every day or the people you take care of, they ask you questions, and everything gets filtered through our philosophy. When someone sits down, like twice yesterday evening when someone new came in, I sit in a lower chair than they sit in, and we just have a conversation because I want to get rid of that high and mighty me nonsense right away. And I sit in a lower elevation than they do, and we just have a nice conversation for a little bit. And um, you get to know what other people's needs are. But every question, everything I ask is to help answer questions for what I need to do in my role as a healthcare provider. And what I mean by that is, um, you know, I need to know certain things to practice the chiropractic work that we do, where a medical doctor would ask a question in a different way. And it's necessity, because to do what they need to do, they have to know different things than what we need to do sometimes. So the philosophy we use in our practices is that filter that everything goes through in both directions to us. And if, as a chiropractor, we talk about the one cause and one cure. And the one cause of all, failed health in, is the body's inability to relate to its internal and its external environment. It's an awareness and response problem. So that's the awareness. We have to have our bodies, our brains have to have an awareness of our internal and external environment. And the one cure is the body's ability to heal itself. It's not what I do as a chiropractor. It's not what a medical doctor does, is giving a patient a medication, or a surgeon does with a scalpel, or a psychologist does with suggestive therapy. It's all the same thing. We're trying to make a change so that the body can better relate to its internal and external environment and respond properly. We just look at it differently. The outcome, the way we drive towards that is different. But that idea that the body heals itself, that's not universal to us. That's universal to every healing art that exists. And the idea that the body has to have, there has to be an innate awareness of everything that's going on inside of us and around us so that we can respond to it properly, that's nothing. I mean, that's not a chiropractic thought. That's just what we look at as chiropractors. But there's no doctor of any kind on the planet that would disagree with any of that. So,
Yeah,
it's just that filtering process we use, the color of the lenses we look through when we look at a film compared to when you and I, as a chiropractor, when we look at a film and we see a scoliosis, that may or may not be an issue. There may be a spine that is textbook pretty, this beautiful straight spine, and it could look like melted ice cream balls with giant spurs all over it. Which person is healthier, the person who's adapted to the stresses that they're under to form that scoliosis, or the person who's got this textbook straight spine that from the front view anyway, that has all these spurs? That's not a healthy state per se. It's someone under a great deal of stress.
yeah, I would fully agree with that, and I love your concept of this one cause, one cure, and it being, I guess you'd call it like an irrefutable truth. Like there isn't any doctors out there that would disagree with that. It's just the way that we get there.
Sure.
And from our perspective as chiropractors, we have a much different perspective than what a surgeon would have, as an example. You mentioned around you had I assume a couple of new clients in yesterday, and you had a chat with them. Is there anything, like, say for people listening now, if they're a chiropractor and they're like, oh, I wonder, does he say anything in particular to these new clients to try and get some of this across? Because philosophy is a more difficult one potentially to explain to clients. What would you say to that?
It is, and I use a lot of analogies. One thing I try to drive home in that first discussion, and there's a lot of things, but one of the things I try to drive home is the idea that cause matters. In the healthcare community at large, cause isn't even really that big of an issue. If in my bedroom my fire alarm goes off in the night, and it's driving me crazy, so I go in and see someone, and they give me prescribe a set of headphones, so I wear them at night, and it doesn't bother me as much, but it's still annoying. So this isn't working. Do you have anything else? And they prescribe maybe a ceiling fan, or they prescribe one of those little shower cap things that go over when they're building a home. They put those on so they don't go off while they're building. And that helps, but they're not hermetically sealed around it, so it's still going off, and you've got to do something else. So they might send a surgeon to my home to go up in the ceiling and cut the nerves to the smoke detector, and now I can sleep. That's not the problem. The noise isn't the problem. Why is the noise there? Well, the noise is there because of the smoke. Well, why is the smoke there? Well, the smoke is there because somewhere there's something generating smoke, and that's the cause. And in our healthcare system, largely, it's not as focused on cause as it needs to be. There is a movement across the world right now that actually there's an educator and a medical doctor and an educator at the New South Wales medical school there, who's leading a movement to change healthcare, to change medical education from fighting disease to focusing on restoring health, which to us as chiropractors sounds like, well, that's kind of our view. And it's interesting to see, and they're doing great research work where they're finding fascinating information. Here in America, the head mathematician for the U.S. Army is involved, and Georgetown, University their medical people are involved, and they're trying to change education, but they're finding that there's a lot of resistance, and they don't understand why. But that's because there's such a profit motive behind it. And a lot of the doctors I talked to, I met with a cardiologist and we had a discussion a few weeks ago, and he said, I'm really jealous of the way you practice. And I said, I don't understand. We're licensed in Illinois, the state I'm in. We're licensed under the same Medical Practice Act is what they call it here. And here in our state, we don't have a chiropractic law. We practice we're the only place in the United States like this, but we don't have a law. We're under the Medical Practice Act. So we're licensed under the same thing. Do what I do. What's so hard? And he said, I can't, because if I practice the way I really want to practice, I'll lose my hospital privileges. And what good is a cardiologist that can't walk into a hospital? And they feel trapped. And I get that. And it's frustrating. And the system does need to change. It's hugely profit driven. And, an internist who's a terrific guy, and we refer people back and forth that need, some people do need that type of, care, obviously. And I would rather they go talk to him because he's a little more thoughtful in what he does than just the knee jerk. This is your thing, take that type of thing. He talks through people, and anyway. And there had just been a massive cholesterol study done probably 10, 12 years ago. And it was the largest cholesterol study at the time that had ever been done. And they went through and they looked at people who had high cholesterol. And they said, we'll take a number of these people and a number of who took the medication and a number of people who didn't take the medication. And let's compare their outcomes over time. And what they found is there was a 1% difference in the rate of heart disease, not heart disease, but heart attacks. And the conclusion of the study was, and it was a massive study, and they said, given the side effects associated with cholesterol medications, they may not be worth taking. They didn't say they're not worth taking because they probably didn't want to get sued, but they did say they may not be worth taking. And I thought, well, that's good. Maybe they'll prescribe less. And this man had just come into our office, and I was taking his films, and I said, just as a point of conversation, I said, do you find yourself giving fewer cholesterol medications because of that study? And he said I read this, I had heard about that study. I said, when do you find yourself giving fewer medications? And he said, no. I said, I don't understand. What do you mean? And he said, let me tell you how this works. He said, our practice isn't run by us. It's run by pencil pushers. And they look at the numbers and they don't care about anything else. It's all about the numbers. And he said, we have a pharmacy in our clinic. And if I don't give you 5 prescriptions when you walk out that door, when you have high cholesterol and heart issues, you have to leave with 5 prescriptions. If you don't, they call me into a room and they chew me out. And quite honestly, I'm tired of it. And I felt bad for him because I thought, what a terrible way to go through life. You have this passion to do something good for society and for the people in your community, and you get out and you find that you're handcuffed from doing what you really want to do. And I just feel bad for these people. I mean, medical doctors traditionally, years ago, they were kind of abrasive to the chiropractic profession. I understand that, but today I don't see that as much as years ago. And I feel bad because I think a lot of people get into healthcare of all kinds because they want to make a difference, they want to help people, and they want to make a decent living at the same time. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. And they find that to even maintain their hospital privileges, they have to do things that they personally know aren't the best thing for that person. And it's frustrating for them. So I'm glad that in our profession, we really have a lot more autonomy than they do in a lot of other fields. So we selected pretty well, I think, for ourselves, and but everybody has a different passion. So
I agree. I was this close to becoming a medical doctor, and it was a fork in the road, and I chose left instead of right. At the time, it was for a number of reasons, but as I look back, I go, whoo, I made the right choice there.
Yeah.
I definitely do not regret the decision I've made. And
No, the medical doctors we had as kids, in the neighborhood, there was one 2 houses away from me, and his office was the front half of his house, and it was a nice place, and he was a nice older guy. And most of the time, he'd pat somebody on the head and go, "You're fine," and just send you out the door, and that was the end of it. And you don't get a lot of that anymore. He was his own. He did his own thing, and you just don't see that. Even dental offices today. I mean, it's hard to go into a dental office without, a lot of them where I'm at are owned by companies buy them from the dentists, and now they have to do what that company tells them to do. You have to sell whitening. You're not doing enough of, you're not putting enough posts in. You're not doing enough of this or that. And they're always about the numbers and statistics. And now it's getting to the point where dentists aren't as happy as they used to be either. And it's, I hope it doesn't get to us, but I'm sure one day, it will start to affect our profession as well if it hasn't already. I don't know.
Yeah, we're kind of the rebels in that case, aren't we? Because there have been some bigger groups of chiropractic offices. Like I believe one in America is the Joint, and there's I don't know. My understanding is there's hundreds of those guys. But with that said, I don't think that ended up being owned by a big company, but by a chiropractor who just wanted to expand chiropractic or whatever it is. Even though it may not be a model that I choose to use, it's not you need to do this. And I think it's a little bit different, but you're right. It could very likely be going that way. Back to what we were saying, I think we would both agree in that the medical model overall is a bit broken. It's a bit more of a sick care than a health care. And that, it's very interesting that you were saying that they're going down this health route. But the other side to it is I have a few medical doctors that I know personally, and they said it can be quite difficult as well. And I'm curious to hear your perspective, putting on your philosophy hat. A lot of patients come in and demand medications. I thought that's where you were going with what you'd said, where people will come in and they got high cholesterol and they're like, well, I want those meds because they don't know any different. They think that's what's going to fix them. And how could you not give me these meds? What do you think? Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's probably close to 30 years ago. There was a study done, and they found that the majority of doctors would give you a prescription if you asked for it. And that no more than came out. And every commercial now on television ends with "ask your doctor," because they know that you can pressure people. There used to be a drawing, and you may have seen it, and it says on the bottom, "Drug-Free America," and there was a picture of a baby, and underneath it said amoxicillin, and a little bit older child, and it was something else, and a teenager, and it's appetite depressants, and and then it ended with someone in a wheelchair throwing handfuls of pills up in the air and trying to catch them in their mouth. It was just, and when I was new in practice, and I had it on the counter one week just because I thought it was an interesting picture. I wanted to make people think. And I don't do a lot of that kind of thing anymore because I'm not antagonistic to medicine. We don't do the same thing. If people talk about how in our country the practice of medicine is the third leading cause of preventable death, what they call iatrogenic disease, doctor caused. And I don't like to hear that, and I speak a lot, and a lot of times, somewhere in the day, someone will bring up one of those statistics and mention it. You hear the grumble go through the room where everybody's like, "Those people," And I'll usually get up later and say something like, "Yeah, 186,000 people a year. That's terrible." And you hear it go across the room, and I'll say, do you know what would kill way more people? Give me a prescription pad and a scalpel. I'll kill everybody. I don't know what I'm doing. It's a dangerous field they're in. They've made a choice to get into something that's, it's the flying will end is walking a tightrope. Eventually something's going to happen. I mean, it just doesn't bode well, but we just look at things so differently. We look for that restoration of health because, as D.D. Palmer, the founder of our profession, said, and his first postulate was, Health, disease is not an entity. What he meant by that is health is the thing. Disease isn't a thing. We get sick because our ability to adapt properly has diminished. They do here in the United States. There's several, and it's starting to grow. Several big teaching hospitals where they use in the neonatal intensive care units with premature children when they're born, they're very susceptible to sepsis, which is a full body infection. And by the time they identify it, because these children are so weak, a lot of them don't survive. So what they found is they can use that EKG they have hooked up to them and run it through heart rate variability software. And when they watch that heart rate variability, when it decreases, they're not adapting as well. When it decreases, they jump in and start treating that newborn or that premature child with probably antibiotics or whatever they use, but their field, not mine. And they have saved many more of those children. They're starting to see that when you step away from that health process and it starts to diminish, we're now susceptible. We've gone from being resilient to being susceptible. So in my office, I use skin temperature, and which is for chiropractors, that's something that's pretty common, but any other professions listening, we use bilateral temperature along the spine, and we're looking for that dermatome change because each level of the spine has certain areas of skin that it supplies. So what I'm looking for is a quick deflection that tells me, boy, right here at this level, something isn't happening equally proper on both sides. There's a massive difference. And we look at that on our films and determine what the position of that vertebra might be, and through other testing determine whether we need to make an intervention and put a force into that spine to make a change. And it's just such a different concept looking at that loss of health. And so when I tell people, when they sit down and I'm going to check them, I say, let's see how we're adapting today. And or I'll ask them, how are you adapting today? And they don't know. They know they don't know that answer. But if you say, well, let's see how your spine's doing. In their mind, they're thinking, my spine's fine, I feel good. Or let's see how your nerve system's doing. Well, I feel good. And they think that's the same thing. It's not. It's how we adapt and how we function in life. Because if we're not adapting to those internal and external environmental understanding that we internally have, we innately have, if that response isn't being delivered to those tissue cells of the body properly because something is interfering with that process, then that's interfering with the process of health. So we remove an interference. The same way a surgeon might remove an interference by changing the anatomy with a scalpel. It's the same principle in the broad picture of it. It's the same concept. We're not terrifically different in some of those things, but when D.D. Palmer asked the question in his first large textbook, he mentioned, why are two men working in the same shop, working at the same bench, eating in the same surroundings, breathing the same air? Why is one man sick and the other remain healthy? He wasn't asking why that man was sick. He was asking, why is this man healthy? Because health is the thing. And that's what a lot of these medical doctors that are trying to change their system are seeing that health is the thing. When we step away from health, we become susceptible. So when I check someone and they're not adapting properly, you're stress vulnerable. We need to make a change. We need to check you to see if you're subluxated, to see if that spine needs to have something changed. If everything is fine, then you're stress resilient. You're ready to meet the day. That's a fantastic thing too. And it's a simple change in our verbiage that, quite honestly, is the most honest thing we can say to people, because it is actually reflects reality. There's such simple ways to get our points across philosophically. I use the sunflower a lot. I talk about how, I like the sunflower. I think they're a neat looking thing. So I have one on my windowsill in my office. And I just mentioned this to someone last night. I said, so here on this windowsill, I'll put a sunflower because I like to look at it while I'm in this room. And I'll see 6, 7 people say whatever it is through the morning, and I'll glance over at it. And one of those sneaky people went over and turned it to face the window. So I walk over and I turn that thing back because I want to look at it. And I finish my morning and I go to lunch and I come back And I'm sure I locked that damn door, but while I was gone, someone came in and moved my flower again. And I ask people, when does that quit? When does it stop? And they always say the same thing: when it dies, because it's not adapting anymore. It adapts to the external environment because it needs that photosynthesis. It needs that sunlight to survive. And once that living thing is no longer adapting, that's the moment of death. And last weekend, 2 weekends ago, I did an hour Sunday morning at 7:30 on death, the philosophy of death, which isn't really a great Sunday morning at 7:30 topic, but I thought, since I have a sense of humor and I'm half Irish and death to us is a little funnier, I thought I was a perfect person for the job. And we really kind of talked about what a lot of the ways they look at death, and now they're starting to look at that. In a sense, how when the moment we're no longer adapting is that moment of death. I mean, they're getting there. The tests aren't really, precise yet, but for determining death. But it's a fascinating. It's a poor subject for us right now because death is exactly what we're all here in healthcare for. But we're avoiding that. But it's how we adapt, and there's so many great ways to get these points across. And no matter what our profession is, I mean, shouldn't we all want people to adapt better, and function through life better so that their bodies can meet the stresses of our life? There have never been the levels of stress in my lifetime of almost 60 years now that we have today. And as a society, everything is stressful. Today, I just mentioned to someone today, I said, when I grew up on the very street where my office is now, and I said, my neighbor down the street could have had Congressman X sign in his yard, and we could have had Congressman Y, and we still liked each other. It was fine. But now people find every little thing they can to divide and hate the other person for, and it's getting crazy. As a world, it's getting a little nuts, and parents have to be at, their kid, has practice for, I don't know, frisbee, whatever club they belong to. And if you're you're a bad parent if you don't go and show up and videotape everything. And there's so much pressure on parents today than there used to be. I avoided that, and I went straight to grandkids, which I highly recommend, because my wife had kids years ago, and her kids were grown when we met and got married. But grandson's fantastic, and he's a teenager, and he still likes me, which, sorry, dads, I know that that isn't always the case out there. But I'll be damned if I'm going to have a teenager living in my house that hates me and I still have to feed it. So I avoided the children thing. But it's anyway, I'm getting off subject, but how we adapt to that stress is what we're all about, and that's what health is. It's adapting to stressors of life.
Yeah, that brings up a great point. I tell my clients all the time, I ask the question is, do you know the only time you don't have stress? And most of my clients think about it for a second, and they're like, when you sleep? But it's always answered like that, like a question, like they kind of know it's not true, but they don't know what else to say. I say, well, no, there's tons of stress when you sleep still, but the only time you don't have stress is when you're dead. So it's not about getting rid of stress. It's about your body's ability to handle that stress. And in today's world, I fully agree. Particularly, I would not want to be a kid growing up in today's world. What are your thoughts on what we can do to help teach everybody, but particularly the kids that are growing up in today's world, about that concept of being able to adapt to stress better so that they can handle their life better?
Well, I mean, it really, all the research that's out there is really pointing to the supremacy of the nerve system. There was a doctor by the name of Toner at the London hospital. They were seeking to figure out, why are these people coming to us in their later decades of life with, they're on oxygen and they can't get off, and they're having, they have diabetes, and they have, liver problems, and they have, different organ failures and heart disease, and all of these problems through all of their systems. What is going on that we could have done something about 30, 40 years ago that didn't happen for these people, that they're in our emergency rooms and our critical care units? And what they found through their research is that we have that shift in our that what we would refer to as chiropractors, our mental impulse supply, routes through that, through that fight or flight. It just shifts so dramatically towards fight or flight in this stressful world that we're in, and it's run through the nerve system. That when there's an interference to that nerve system, we see that same shift towards fight or flight. It's very common. I do a lot of heart rate variability and impedance cardiography and different types of research work in my office, and there's thousands of studies that support this same work that show that when the nerve system isn't functioning the way it's supposed to and something's interfering with it, it's going to depress that ability to maintain things the way they should be. And I want to say a balance, because they can both go up. Parasympathetic, sympathetics will both go up, both go down. They're independent. But when you see that shift towards fight or flight, that's what they found drives this, what they call this motor of disease. And they said it was interesting because they referenced it being in what was the word they used? That it's and basically an unapproachable and something you couldn't change, this cycle of disrepair and breakdown until it kills you. And as chiropractors, we read this and go, what do you mean you can't do anything about it? This is what we do. This is our role, is to remove an interference to the function of that nerve system, so that it can be a proper supply route, a proper conduit for the information that is trying to be delivered to the tissue cells, through the nerve system. And that's what we do. And I have hundreds of pre and post adjustment, work I do with patients in my office. And it's night and day, the changes you see. I mean, we see 300-400% shifts in nerve system change. I mean, on the outside. And when they did a study with me at the Ohio State University, which is really one of the leading institutions in the world on this work of what they would probably call psychoneuroimmunology. They study how our psychology and how our nerve system affects our psychology. And but they used me as a subject, and they did a pre and post. They did the work to test everything, and I was hooked up to all of these things. They did a pre and post adjustment on me, and when they saw about a 25 to 30% change in a matter of 6 minutes posted when they rechecked it, they were astounded. And the head of the department, who's been doing this work since the early 70s, he leaned over to me and he said, "That is a massive change." And I thought, 30-40%, I've seen 300. I was kind of disappointed that it was 30-40% change. And it's exciting to be a chiropractor today, because now we can see a future where this type of work is going to be done out there in the research world by our researchers. That's going to help bring us to that conclusion, and our place in society is going to shift dramatically, because people are going to be looking for this type of thing.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point there, because some people who are listening, whether inside or outside the chiropractic profession, when they hear the word philosophy, they tend to think that philosophy and science are at polar opposites. When I was going to chiropractic school, you had the philosophy-based guys and the science-based guys, and they were like sitting on opposite sides of the classroom, and they'd meet at the bridge to fight it out after school and all, right? But what I'm hearing from you, literally being the man who wrote the two books, well, not the two, but 2 books on philosophy, that you are very well into, diving down that rabbit hole of research. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
love that, because I think philosophy runs research, because research is asking questions.
That's
And
right.
what are the questions? That's where the
Well,
philosophy comes into it.
yes. Well, in the scientific method, the way it was designed to work is philosophy asks a question. Dee Dee Palmer said, "Why is this man remaining healthy?" And so in our profession, a few years ago during the COVID issue, the WFC, which is a World Federation of Chiropractic, they're a self-appointed overseer in a lot of ways. They sent a letter out that April of 20 telling people in the field, you are not allowed to talk about immune response changes with chiropractics. We don't have the research to support that. And to me, that was a letter of confession, because they're saying for 30 or 40 years, you've been funding us and we haven't done a damn thing. We haven't answered the very first question Dr. Palmer asked over 100 years ago. We have fifth lumbar studies. We don't have any fourth lumbar studies. We don't have any third lumbar studies. We have fifth lumbar studies. That's it. I mean, if we really are going to hold that kind of a line where we say, oh, unless we have this volume of research, we can't discuss it. That's absolutely absurd. And not only that, but I have COVID pre and post adjustment work that I've done in my office, and I could show you massive changes that happen. And not only that, but there's a website called entropycalc.com, and it's a website I put up. It was funded, actually. The Center for Chiropractic Progress heard I was doing it, and they paid for the work to be done. And there's 3 algorithms there, and you can run this EKG data through it, and it will determine if pre and post intervention, if a person's functioning at a higher level, if they're more coordinated than they were before. And it's, even though it's looking at cardiovagal response, just through the vagus nerve to the heart, it actually is talking about, you can run it through these algorithms, and it extrapolates that information to talk about the entirety of the whole body. So every single system of the body is included in this calculation. So yes, it does mean the neuroimmune function has improved. The neurorespiratory function is improved. The neurodigestive function is improved, because we don't have a digestive system. A corpse has a digestive system. We have a neurodigestive system. Living things, you cannot separate the nerve system, because it's not a system anymore. The system is about the control and what it does. It doesn't do anything. You know, a brain and a nerve system don't run anything, because a corpse has a brain and a nerve system. It's not running anywhere. So when you think about that, it's the intelligence that's within us as living things. And I'm not talking about some spiritual woo-woo thing. I'm talking about that plant on my windowsill. At the moment that plant dies, it no longer turns to face that. Now, if you want to talk about the plant having a soul, that's your discussion. I don't really know what to say about that one way or the other. But all I can say is, from a scientific perspective, we can see something's dramatically different in something that's not living. And that ability to adapt and regulate itself is gone. And that's what living things would strive to do. And that's where our philosophy is so important as chiropractors. You know, in philosophy, we talk about philosophy, science, and art, and the reality is philosophy encompasses science and art. It's part of philosophy. So you can't really understand the philosophy of our profession unless you understand how it applies to science and art, how that function works together. It's one thing. It's not 3 separate things. So in the scientific method, philosophy asks the question, why is this man healthy? Science looks at that question and says, well, we can look at it this way. And they design studies, and they derive data from those studies, and they present the data. Philosophy then is supposed to take the data and determine how it is to be used, what changes it might make, because philosophy weighs the morality of the answer, where science doesn't do that. You know, is this the right thing to do, is a philosophical question. It's not a scientific question, which is why we butt heads with a lot of the science, so-called science in our field, because what we do in our profession is, in most professions, a researcher says, what would I like to prove? And then they design a study that will prove what they want to prove, and then they publish it, and there it is. So look what I did. And that's not the way the scientific method is supposed to work. And it's revolting to science to work that way, and it's unfortunate. So that's where we are.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it, like you said earlier, is it'll come back to the money. You know, follow the money.
Yeah.
And when you ask the right question, I think back to that cholesterol study. I don't know if it was a different study or not, but when the people who were testing the cholesterol meds to get them on the market asked the question, do cholesterol meds lower blood cholesterol? The answer to that is absolutely they do. But maybe the better question is do these medications help patient outcomes? You know, that's a completely different question,
Absolutely.
and would have changed the whole cholesterol market. So yeah, the questions you ask basically guide you in your science. I love it. And you mentioned that you are now looking outside of the profession with a lot of your research. Um, you mentioned about maybe being a little fiery. This might be the question that might be a little fiery here. So I'm very curious to see, why is it you've reached outside the profession to try and get some of these questions answered? Um,
Well,
yeah.
I have tried. I have tried several times. I've taken funded studies to chiropractic schools on several occasions where there was an outside entity willing to pay for functional MRI studies to watch brain activity pre and post adjustment. And that actually, functional MRI, you can actually run that through these same algorithms on that website. It's not just for heart rate, it's anything physiological you look at over time. So you can run that data through. So like Heidi Havoc does a lot of research with you know different PET scans and different things. Those could be run through, and I've checked into it with the people that worked with some of those studies, and they no longer have the data, because it would be great to show that this person's healthier post adjustment. It's unquestionably mathematical, and we're talking about algorithms that have p-values of not they're less than, what is it, 0.05 is what we're looking for, a 5% chance that it's coincidence. These are 0.01 times 10 to the minus 11th.
Wow.
Nothing in our profession has ever been done at this level of certainty, and it frustrates me that I could get nowhere. One school was quite excited, and they had to run it through a person who had nothing to do with this, who was one of these people who doesn't want this type of conclusion made. He doesn't want to find out if it's true. And so it never went anywhere. In the other school, I flew across the country to sit down with their researchers, and the door was locked. Thought, okay, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And so I started talking with researchers outside of our field, outside of chiropractic, know nothing about chiropractic. And what's amazing to me, I will ask them questions about their research that they hadn't thought of. That in the perspective that we as chiropractors, we look at that differently. Our mentality is a little different. So I look at something and say, they're talking about an innate intelligence. They're talking about something in there doing this. When they talk about tissue cells being loosely yoked biooscillators, I asked that researcher, who's the head of a major university here, research in the East Coast of the United States. I said to him, what drives the yoke? Well, what do you mean? I said, well, you called them loosely yoked biooscillators. So if there's a yoke, what's driving the oxen? What's on that yoke? What's behind it that's steering it? And he said, I never thought about that. And I said, well, you use the terminology. And he said, there's a reason for it, but I wasn't sure what it was. And I still don't know. And that opened the door, and we have great conversations about these things. And when I talk to them about the vertebral subluxation and the four components of the subluxation, the malposition of the vertebra, the occlusion of a frame, and the nerve interference, and the idea that there's an interference with the mental impulse supply. Then the mental purpose of the mental impulse philosophically in our profession is it's to cause that tissue cell to adapt for this moment in time. And so if we can measure how we're adapting, that's mental impulse supply. Now, we don't directly measure blood pressure when they do blood pressure studies. Bacchus, who was here in Chicago, was the #1 blood pressure researcher in the world, and he did a study with chiropractic, and they put cuffs on people to measure it. No one said, whoa, you're measuring arm distension. You're not measuring blood pressure. No one did that. You're not measuring blood pressure. You're measuring arm distension. But we can extrapolate that from that information. It's widely accepted and fine. There's no difference between doing that and measuring the effects of the mental impulse and how we adapt. So when I sit down and explain the four components to these researchers, not one has ever said to me, I don't know. Every one of them said, oh yeah, we can quantify that. Every one of them. And in our profession, we have to change the definition of the subluxation. I just shake my head and think, won't you please understand it first? And that's where we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater in our profession, trying to do something we don't understand. And these researchers, and it shocks me, but I've heard it so many times now. One of the major cancer researchers in Europe, the first time we talked, by the time we got off the phone, she said to me, I want to do research with you. And I thought, I'm just a guy in Chicago that practices. I'm not a researcher. I don't want to be a researcher, but I want this work done. Before I go, I would love to see the things I see in practice given the validation from science that it deserves. Not that it matters to me in that sense, but science deserves to see these conclusions that I see every day. For them more than for me. My patients don't need to see it. I've had kids from 2 years old to 14 years old walk after their first adjustment. How do I retire? How do you do this? I just don't get it. When I see people say, well, I retired at 40, I just think of all the people that didn't get help by you. I don't understand how you do that. And it's okay that they do that. I'm not angry with people, but I can't do it. I look at our society and think, boy, they need what we do. Someone is not going to get the care they need. There's some child that's sitting at home watching other kids play outside because they're sick all the time and they have all these ear problems. They have whatever it is. Why does my kid have this left ear infection over and over and over again? I had one in yesterday. And I said to the parent, is it so it's both ears? Well, no, it's the left ear. And I said, okay. Is it always the left ear? Well, yeah. I said, so is it a left-eared kidney bacteria? Is it a left-handed kidney bacteria that can only get into the left ear? Do you believe that makes sense? Well, no. I said, why is the right ear healthy? That's a better question. What's the right ear doing if the left ear is not? Do you think that there might be something interfering with the neuroimmune function in that ear? I said, well, scientifically, what they call this in this kind of case is an immune paralysis. I said, this is a problem. We need to address what's behind it because cause matters. Oh, my ear's red. Here, take this. Your ear won't be red. I mean, that's not solving the problem. If it is, then why do people continue to take blood pressure medication? I take blood pressure medication. Okay, so are you done with it? Well, no. Well, why not? Is it taking care of the problem? Yeah. Well, then why do you have to keep taking it? Do you know what I mean? What's been done for you medically to this point when you've come in to see me in my office that's done you the most permanent good for this problem? And the answer is nothing. And I'm not picking on medicine. They have a role, but I'm saying we look at it differently. We're looking for that cause. We're looking for dominoes back in that chain, trying to resolve the issue, trying to find something that makes sense to remove an interference so that their body can do what it was meant to do, the way it's supposed to work. I had a man probably about 10 years ago that came into me, and he was walking down the hallway in front of me. And I always like to watch people walk. And he was walking to the room we were going to ahead of me, and he was limping pretty terrifically with his right leg. And we got in the room, we talked, never mentioned his right leg, never mentioned anything to do with his right leg. And I thought, I got to ask. I said, I noticed you have quite a limp. What's going on with that? And he said, oh, that. He said, I've had that. He was in his 80s. He said, I've had that since I was 7. I said, that's over 70 years. Why? What happened? And he said, well, when I was a kid, I had polio and both my legs were paralyzed. That one just never came back. I've limped my whole life. And do you know within 2 weeks, that man never limped again? 70 years, this man limped for no reason. Now, I didn't go out. My thought wasn't, oh, I have to figure out why he's limping. My thought was, well, the man's got nerve interference because, the tests I do show he does. That's my goal. I want when I check him to show that he's clear and that he no longer has the problems he has. So as far as function, function of the nerve system, that's what I'm interested in, function through the nerve system. So if we remove that interference, hey, what happens. If you have a rubber band wrapped 6 times around your finger and we leave it there for a while, it starts to hurt. It gets a little swollen. So, let's massage it. So you work that finger a minute. All of a sudden, it feels a little better. Better? Yeah, great. Leave it on there. A minute or two later, it's hurting again. Well, let's exercise it. So we do this for a minute or two. It feels a little better. Okay, great. We solved the problem. Well, we can give you something so you won't feel the pain anymore. What do you think of that? Well, no, I don't want that. Well, how about my job is to remove the rubber band? But what if I take the rubber band off and it doesn't solve the problem? Do you want me to put it back on? Well, no. That's what I do. You figured it out. I mean, it's not hard to explain to people. Kids get it. I have rubber bands. I'll put them right on their finger, and we have a discussion. And I ignore their finger for a minute until they're kind of showing it to me, like going like this. So, I want them to think it through and realize how their bodies work. It's a simple thing in our profession. And, one of the things I'm doing this year, actually, for the first time is with my best friend and I. We graduated together. We decided that we want to help make a difference in that direction. So we're doing 8 hours in Europe one in August. But we're just to kind of go over this stuff and talk about how we explain these things to people and what the core concepts of our philosophy are, and how to get the points across, because it's important to do. We have a responsibility as chiropractors, I think, to make sure that it's better for the future chiropractors than it was for us. And I think each generation has that. My great uncle graduated from Palmer School of Chiropractic 100 years ago. So my family's been in chiropractic for 100 years. His grandson became a chiropractor when he was still in practice, and his wife. And I became a chiropractor, shortly after he passed. And then my cousin's son has become. There's 5 of us now that are chiropractors in my family. 4 still left. And to me, when you graduate, I mean, he graduated in 1924. And in Illinois, where I practice, if you graduated in 1952, it was still illegal. In Louisiana, it was still legal until 1974. They were still arresting people in 1973 in Louisiana. And it sounds crazy to me that you'd be arrested for being a chiropractor. And we owe history to do our responsibility. The Crusader class of June 1923 had over 800 students in it, which was typical back then. And that June class of 1923, Dr. Barge, who was a famous chiropractor in our profession, his father was in that class. Clarence Gonstead was in that class. There were a lot of, John Q. Thaxton was in that, a lot of famous people in that class. And within 6 months, half that class had been arrested. Over 400 of those people had been arrested within 6 months, because there was such a sense of urgency in medicine. They were panicked by the presence of chiropractors in their community because they didn't understand us. And it's unfortunate, and it's water under the bridge, and I don't hold any ill will towards the practice of medicine over it or anything. But those people didn't graduate and accidentally get arrested. If you read what they wrote, which I've been doing lately, you see that what they wanted was to graduate and go get arrested so they could get chiropractic legalized. And what they did is so much more than what you or I could ever do with our lifetime in chiropractic for the future of the profession, that I think it's my responsibility. And I view it as a responsibility. So to me, I don't get burnout, because to me, it's the passion of making things better for not just the future of my profession, for the people in my community. And, I feel that's my responsibility. It's not my nest egg. I don't look at it as like, oh, this is what I'm doing so I can fortify my finances. I do this so that I can make a difference for the community, because as I said in the beginning, man ought to be afraid to die until he's contributed something great to humanity. And what we have, no one else can do. No one else can do. There's no healthcare profession out there that does what we do. And the reason these researchers are so interested in what I do, because they think it's me, they don't realize it's a whole profession of us, that they would love to do some of their work and show that, wow, this can be better. And they're blown away by that. So I pontificate, sorry.
No, I think, what I'm getting out of this conversation, for me to sort of summarize it from my perspective, is like I said earlier, when I was in school, there was the 2 schools, the philosophy and the science. And what you're doing is really melding the 2 together, which I believe is the most important thing to do right now to drive our profession forward. Because I think there's still that, and there's a drive within our chiropractic schools, not only here in Australia, but in America, to remove the subluxation, remove the quote unquote philosophy. But when you look at it through the conversation we just had, it just makes so much sense to use the philosophy of what we do and all of the stuff that we don't understand yet to drive the science, so that we can, like you said, not for you, not for me, we believe in it already, whatever you want to call it, but for the young ones, for the people who are graduating now, who might need to see a little bit more because they haven't seen it in practice yet. They are not being given the philosophy that we did graduating decades ago. So I'd like to sort of end it with maybe a question that'd be interesting to you. So if you had a couple of pieces of advice for you 35 years ago when you first graduated, or if you want to take it into today's world, some advice for either the students or the new graduates, what would you say?
Well, probably one thing is that I was very nervous when I remember when I graduated from Palmer in December of '89. The coldest day of the entire winter, it was about 5,000 degrees below zero. It was so cold. And I remember they handed me to my diploma and took my picture, and I walked to the corner of the stage, and I can remember vividly that I reached for the first stair with my right foot, and before it hit, I thought, I don't feel smarter, because I thought like this lightning bolt was going to hit me and make me a chiropractor. I was like, now I got it. And I'll never forget that feeling like, oh my God, I don't know if I'm really ready. Do I know everything I need to understand? Can I put the pieces together? Can I explain this to people? And I was very nervous about it. So I worked with someone else for 2 years. And we had different philosophies, let's just say. And he used to tell me all the time, he said, you used to say, you're too smart to be a chiropractor. You should go to school and be an MD. And I'm thinking, what in the hell are you talking about? We should be proud to be what we do. And it was just difficult for me to be in those 2 years of practice with this man. And one day I said to myself, I can drown with this guy wrapped around my neck, or I can swim out on my own and drown on my own. I'd rather have that than have help. I don't need help to drown. And boy, it was so much easier than I thought it would be to start my own practice. And I wish I had done that sooner for me. But I think I would have worked harder earlier to come up with simpler analogies and simpler ways of explaining what I do for people, because I overcomplicated things as a new graduate because I wanted to impress people with what I learned. I know stuff and I want to show you stuff, and they don't care. They care very little about any of that stuff. And the other thing that I actually did do that I think was probably the smartest thing I did, I found the oldest, most brilliant chiropractors I could find. I would hunt them down. I would save everything I could until I could afford a plane ticket, and I would go. And I would spend a few days in their office watching them do what they do. And I worked with people that graduated all the way back to the 1920s and watched them. And I learned that, man, they don't explain things very well. No, they explain things perfectly. They made it so simple that people could absorb it and understand it. And don't overcomplicate what we do. Don't overcomplicate, the explanations you give people. Keep it simple. Focus on the cause. Get to the idea that causes matter, because nothing gets to the cause in healthcare. And that's the frustration people have and what they're looking for. They're looking for a different way to look at it. And the cause is the body's inability to relate to its internal and external environment. And the neurosystems of the body, which is everything, that is how that relationship happens. It happens through the nerve system. And that's what we do as chiropractors. We make sure there's nothing interfering with that. And I think that if I could have understood that sooner, it would have made my first few years less stressful, because there's those stressful days and we all have them. And, any chiropractor, I've been doing this 35 years, and for anyone to sit in front of a crowd and say, I'm thrilled to death every day and I never have a moment where I'm like, ugh, and we all have those moments. I don't care who it is. There's no chiropractor on earth that doesn't once in a while just have an hour or, a day where you see the last patient of the day on the list is like, oh my God, this guy's an energy sucker. He just wants to talk about, all the medical things he's had done every time he comes in. And I'm thinking, why do we need to keep going over this stuff? And it's meaningless now because he doesn't have any of these problems. But man, he's going to suck the energy out of me. And I spend more stressful moments when I see one of those names at the end of the day, because all I can think of is I'm going to go home with this in my head after this great day today. And you know whose fault that is? It's mine, because I made it that way. And I don't do that every time, but every once in a while, you kind of go, really? Can't we find somebody else to put at the end of the day? Because I don't want to go home with this. But it's just being honest. That's all. I'm trying to be honest with the way practice really is. And, but the biggest thing I see is the joy that people have when they find that. I had a gentleman in last night for his first visit, and he said, well, I know my low back issues are all because my spine, I have what do they call that? What do they call that? It's all the rage today. The narrowing
Of the
spinal
stenosis?
stenosis.
Yes. Okay. Yep.
I have spinal stenosis, and I'm thinking you and everybody else that comes in my door has spinal stenosis. Well, and I told him, I said, I went over his after we took his films, I went over them with him, and I said, here, um, if this problem is really all about spinal stenosis, I honestly can't help you. But what I see here is this, and I explained to him the positioning of the vertebra, what I'm seeing on this spinograph, this film, and I talked to him about what I found. And I put it's like a large BB. They're stainless steel balls, and I tape them on the spine where I find those temperature breaks. And so they're on the film, and so I can go over those with the film, and he knows where they were because he knows where I put them. And so I go over those with him and explain what I'm seeing and why we found those in the area, and they happen to be right where the problem seems to be on that film. It makes a lot of sense. So everything's fitting together, and I said, so I'm going to adjust this vertebra, and I'm going to provide an adjustment. And I get him on his side, and I go over to those films, and I center myself, and I focus on that spot I need to locate, not here, here. And I know that direction I need to put that force in to rotate that vertebra and bring it forward exactly the way I really see that thing in 3 dimensions. And I go back to him again, and I make that contact, and I set that vertebra. I put that force in to define innate intelligence. That's the vertebra. You want to be technical, of course, that's true. But he gets up off the table, and I said, okay, we're done for today. And I didn't ask him how he feels. I didn't ask anything. I walked over and I shut the view boxes off. And I know he's pacing back and forth behind me, trying it on, seeing how these shoes fit, so to speak. And he said to me, I don't feel it anymore. And I said, I'll be damned it wasn't stenosis then, I guess. Because if if the room around your spinal cord is shrunken like they tell you, then I can't change that.
That's right.
And that's the thing. I want them to understand they're not getting to the cause. They don't care about cause. And I think spinal stenosis is a catch-all that we can just throw that at something, and it's in my outbox off my desk now. When I graduated, everyone came in, I have bursitis. And I'd go get Gray's Anatomy out, and I'd show them a picture of the bursa where they're at. And I'd show them, you don't have any bursa anywhere near where you have your problem. How can you have bursitis? I don't understand that. Well, why they say that? I don't know. That's a question for them. But, when we have our philosophy helps us answer those questions for people. And not having that anchor of philosophy, you really search for things like spinal stenosis and.
And that's, sometimes when we find ourselves going too far down the rabbit hole of quote unquote science.
Yeah.
The medical profession, I find sometimes their description is, if I can find any problem, I'll say that is causing that. I use the study that shows around disc herniation and how 80% of people over the age of 40 have a disc herniation, and 80% of those people don't even know they have a disc herniation because it's not hurting. But you find one, and automatically all of your aches and pains are because of a disc herniation. That probably is not the case. Right.
That's true. Well, and from the perspective of what science does, there's never been nothing scientifically has ever been proven. Science doesn't prove, it doesn't find fact, it finds probability. And that's fine, but it doesn't find fact. So when people say, well, you can't prove the philosophy, well, that's actually not true, because proof and fact come through formal logic, which deduction is a form of formal logic, and our philosophy is through deduction. So yes, we can prove it. Yes, it's fact. You may not like it as science, but you don't even have probability. Give me some probability. That's what you do. And they're not doing it. So, it's the difficulty we're in today, is just trying to get the two sides to stop throwing tomatoes at each other long enough to sit down and have an honest conversation about what we each know and what we don't know. So,
and I think that's a great way to finish things off. Let's try and use less tomatoes.
There, absolutely.
So I know you've got a website, chiropracticbooks.com, where we can get your books and others around the philosophy. So I do hope that our conversation today has sparked some more interest in our profession and outside our profession about learning more about philosophy. And that is going to be a great place to start. Do you
Absolutely.
have a link or something? I can't remember if you mentioned it, for your discussion that you're going to have around simplifying these philosophical concepts. Did you say it was over in Europe somewhere that you're going to
Oh,
do?
oh,
Yeah,
I can provide that. It's
perfect.
going to be in Dublin, August 31st. Um,
Fantastic. So I'll
it's
put that
we've been
link.
talking. My best friend and I, we've been doing this for 35 years, and we practice very similarly. And he is also he is a we both received our philosophy diplomates, and we both have become fellows of chiropractic philosophy as well. And we talk constantly, and we're very frustrated that things get overcomplicated in our profession, and we just want to make it easier for people. And I'm not out to get into practice management. I don't want to do any of the I don't that's not my thing. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not what I want to do. I just want to give people the information I can to do the best that I can to give what people gave to me and move it forward. So, but I'll provide you a link. I didn't think of it before. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I'll put it in the show notes for anyone who's looking for it. Highly recommend it because um, I've learned so much from this conversation. So thank you so much. I can just imagine people earlier on in their practice, their minds are going rampant right now with ideas and thoughts of things to make it simple for people, because I think that's really going to be the key. Well, two keys that I take away is the meshing together of philosophy and science and how they're so intertwined together, but then also simplifying our message to people, because the message is there. It just like we talk about with the spine and a nerve block, and the message not getting from brain to body or body to brain. If we can't get the message to the people, then they're not going to get it either, and therefore our profession is not going to grow the way that it should. So yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. Super appreciate it. Love the conversation.
I appreciate the opportunity. It was a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll talk to you again soon on Questioning Authority. Thanks for listening to this episode of Questioning Authority. I hope you enjoyed the show. Stay tuned for the next one coming out soon. This episode has been brought to you by The Authority Co., helping service providers increase authority and revenue. Check out theauthorityco.com for more info.